Mr. President.
Senator from Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. President. Last weekend, a man camped out on the 32nd floor of the Mandalay Bay Hotel in Las Vegas. He stockpiled 23 weapons, hundreds of rounds of ammunition. He set up bipods and scopes. He brought a hammer to knock out the window. And then on Sunday, he opened fire. And he kept firing for 15 minutes, stopping only to reload and switch weapons. In over 15 minutes, he murdered 58 Americans and injured more than 500. The day after the shooting, Mr. President, I was in Washington. I had 7 or 8 meetings, and not a single person in those meetings brought up the worst shooting in modern American history, not one. I'm not sure if it was 2 mass shootings ago or 3 when we started to accept this as a normal condition of American life, when we lost our belief that it was within our power to protect our fellow Americans at a country music concert or at a nightclub, a movie theater, or at a school. I know there are strong beliefs about guns in America, principled beliefs, but there are also steps that the overwhelming majority of Americans want us to take. 90% of Americans think we need background checks for every gun sale, including 74% of NRA members. 89% of Americans think we should prevent the mentally ill from purchasing guns. 82% of Republicans want us to bar gun purchases for people on the no-fly or terrorist watch list, yet Congress has done nothing to respond to the American people. We did nothing after Aurora, after Newtown, after Orlando, nothing. Unlike Washington and Colorado, our legislators, after 2 mass shootings in Aurora and at Columbine, our legislators rose to the occasion and made tough choices after we suffered 2 of the worst mass shootings in our nation's history. After the massacre at Columbine, we closed the gun show loophole. After the tragedy in Aurora, we strengthened our background checks in a western state. Last year, those background checks blocked 8,704 people from buying guns. That may sound like a lot, but 380,000 people applied for guns in Colorado last year. That means just 2% of those folks who applied were blocked, and 98% were able to buy a gun without a problem. Who was that 2% that Colorado is blocking, but this Congress fails to block? Among them were murderers and rapists and kidnappers and domestic abusers. No one can come to this floor and tell me that Colorado is worse off because we kept guns out of the hands of those people. The average wait time for those background checks was 12 minutes. That strikes me as a fair trade-off to keep guns out of the hands of murderers and kidnappers and rapists. But here in Washington, despite now an annual tragedy after tragedy, Congress has done nothing. We haven't even done simple things like close the gun show loophole or stop people on the terrorist watch list from buying weapons. This isn't about taking guns away from people who have them. It's about keeping guns out of the hands of people who nearly everybody agrees shouldn't have them. It's about stopping more people like the Las Vegas killer from modifying his rifles to become almost fully automatic and far more deadly. I've co-sponsored a bill this week to ban those modifications, and I'm encouraged that some of my Republican colleagues seem to be open to that idea. I know we can't stop every madman or every random act of violence in this country. We can't. Just as we can't stop any murder, every murder from happening. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't make them less likely, or that we can't take steps to limit their harm, steps that are backed by the overwhelming majority of Americans and that are fully consistent with the Constitution. I remember after the shooting at Pulse nightclub, I was supposed to take my daughter to camp that day. She was going to be away from us for a month. I can remember I did everything that I could to keep her from hearing the news that day, as the numbers of fatalities increased during the course of the day, because I didn't want her to leave us. She was about 12 at the time, with a sense of fear, the fear that I felt and the country felt. And I am so sorry that my children and America's children have to grow up in a country where mass shootings are common, where we're beginning to see them just as part of our life. I heard somebody the other day on the television say, "That's the price of freedom." What a shame that somebody would say that in the United States of America. What a surrender that represents to our children, to the victims of these crimes. I didn't grow up in that America, but conditions have changed. We've let it happen. And the result is that we now have an entire generation of Americans, of our countrymen, our sons and our daughters, who are growing up with a reasonable fear that they could be a victim of a mass shooting, or that their mom or their dad might not come home one day. Madam President, I think our kids have enough to worry about. And they've got every right to see a movie with their parents, to go dancing with their friends, to see a concert on their one night off without the fear of being shot down by people who have no business carrying such a powerful weapon. And they have a right to expect this Congress will finally do something about gun violence in our country. Violence far greater than anywhere else in the industrialized world. Madam President, in the wake of these horrific acts, as always, Americans spring into action. First responders secure the area and care for the wounded. Neighbors hold vigils to honor the victims and support grieving families. Journalists shed light on what happened and why. Citizens speak out to demand action from their elected officials. They are doing their jobs, and it is time for Congress to do ours. Madam President, I yield the floor.